Welcome to a VR game you probably haven't heard of, the segment where I tell you about an interesting VR game that you probably haven't heard of, and what makes it a special or interesting virtual reality experience. I'm Reality Remake, and today's game is T for God. This VR game is an indie project with a single developer, one songwriter, and one extremely good voice actor.
Now, I am heading to the cradle of humankind, Earth, to do what should have been done a long time ago. As you're listening to this recording, you will know whether I have succeeded or failed.
T for God has been around for a while and has changed a lot over time. It's also still in active development, but is currently a complete experience that you can play from beginning to end. This isn't just a half-baked tech demo, though there is some very unique tech to experience in T for God, and I'm not just talking about all of the laser guns and robots. The setup for the game is simple. You're a futuristic soldier who has a problem with the God Emperor of humanity, so you go to deliver her some tea, and inside the tea is enough explosives to punch a hole in a Derrick-class battlecruiser. To get to the Emperor with your tea, you need to traverse a number of different levels in a technologically advanced but desolate future Earth. Also, there's a war going on for some reason that I never fully understood. I like the premise a lot, but the premise isn't what drew me into this game. No, when I first read T for God's side quest page and downloaded the free demo, what really interested me was this tagline. Quote, T for God is a VR adventure that uses impossible spaces with procedural generation to allow players infinite movement within their own room. I was instantly intrigued, and also instantly curious as to why I hadn't heard of this game before. T for God can and should be played completely by walking. I mean physically walking, with your feet, like you're going to the grocery store or something. Seriously, real-life walking. No need for joystick movement to slide you around through the world, though that's an option if you haven't got the space for a room-scale boundary, and no teleporting by pointing your controller somewhere while clicking a button. As you progress through the sci-fi technological hellscape of future Earth, you do it completely using your feet. After playing for a while, you actually end up walking quite a bit. I racked up 150 meters in 10 minutes when first trying the demo. Most importantly, walking with your own 2 feet in this game felt absolutely amazing and freeing. It's a hard feeling to describe, but I'm gonna try anyway. It's sort of like standing up for the first time after a long bus or plane ride. It feels good to move your legs instead of just standing or sitting in one place. The realization that slowly dawned on me when I first saw a place in the game and realized that I can actually physically walk over to the thing that I was seeing in VR with my actual legs was both hard to compute and incredibly freeing. Even after playing the demo, the first time I started the game, I tried to use the joystick purely by reflex. T for God's freedom of using actual, real movement took a little to settle in at first, but when it did, I felt so much more than usual that I was actually in the world. It was sort of like the first time ever playing a VR game. Another barrier, another abstraction between what I was physically doing and what my eyes were seeing was removed. In this way, T for God is an incredibly unique VR experience, and you should definitely at least try the free demo of it just to experience how a virtual reality game can give you such a feeling of freedom. So how does T for God do this? By using something called impossible space. This is basically when you've got a room and some hallways, but they don't actually make sense. A new hallway can go right into the same physical space the hallway you just came out of came from. This is one of the things that makes T for God a bit of a trip. The space you walk through doesn't entirely make sense. It loops back in on itself, and there would be no way to physically make a building in the layout of a T for God level. Hallways and rooms would physically run into each other. In VR though, this makes it so that when you reach the edge of your play space, the next generated section of rooms and hallways will loop back into an empty area that you can physically walk into, so you never reach the end of your play space. You do end up walking in circles a lot, and the game can feel like running through a maze, but that's all necessary to keep you inside of your play area. This game is an incredible technical achievement for pulling this off so smoothly. There was the occasional bug with the generation of an area, but that was really rare. T for God also makes great use of verticality, not only to provide a sense of grandness and scale, but to also make the levels feel not as cramped and give you the feeling of going somewhere. Elevators and moving machines of all kind also cart you around the level from time to time, which makes sense. Your conception of your real-life body is being moved in the game, and so while technically this is a way to teleport you from time to time, it doesn't actually feel like it. No other game has pulled off what T for God does with its movement system alone. Try the demo and play this game purely just to see what playing a shooter is like when you're actually walking from place to place. It's a transformative virtual reality experience that everyone should try at least once. So even if what I'm going to say about the gameplay doesn't sound appealing, download the demo and give it a shot once so you can feel what I'm talking about here. It's incredible, and I think you'll be impressed. Also, play this game on a standalone headset like a Quest if you can. The impossible space concept involves a lot of turning around in circles, and so if you've got a cord hanging from your headset, it'll get twisted and tangled really fast. Anyway, let's talk about the gameplay. Well, here's where T for God is a little less impressive. Since all of the rooms you're going towards are procedurally generated, you'll find this is a less balanced and fair experience if you just try to play it through from beginning to end like it's Half-Life Alyx or something. T for God can be played straight through to experience the world and story with the challenging bits in between, or as a roguelike. You can turn off a lot of the resource management bits and the need to navigate through levels to make it a more action-focused experience, and there are a lot of modifiers you can use to change the game up and make it easier or harder. The customizability is cool, but for this review, I'm going to talk about the game in the way that I played it the first time, as a single campaign, played from beginning to end, with all of the features enabled, no modifiers, and every death brought me back to the latest checkpoint. So, in case you're not watching the video going with these words, you should know that T for God is a VR shooter at heart. You navigate by following signs with arrows that point in the direction you want to go on the map and fight your way through the mazes of impossible hallways and rooms until you reach the end of the level, and then you keep completing levels until there are no more. Also, some cool stuff happens in between, like turret sections, epic set-piece battles, and the occasional awesome crash.
Prepare for crash landing.
You've got guns and a variety of little robots and devices to find and help you combat threats. Each of your arms has a holster for a weapon that you can activate with the trigger to bring the weapon into your hand, and also a couple of holsters on each leg. Both of your arms have separate energy meters, and firing a weapon or using one of the unlockable abilities uses energy for that arm. You also have a personal shield that functions as your health. Your shields recharge once you haven't taken damage for a while, so if you take a lot of damage quickly, you're destroyed. Your shields will only recharge if you still have shield energy banked though, so you don't have infinitely recharging health, just a pool of health that can and will run out. You can recharge your energy at energy recharge stations and your shields at shield recharge stations as you progress throughout the game. The recharge stations are pretty spread out, and once I did get into an infinite instant death loop because I had almost no health at both the autosave and the save at the beginning of the chapter. For some reason, not a single shield recharging station spawned throughout the entirety of the second level, which is very likely just a quirk of the procedural generation and unintentional. This was not a fun time for me, though generally you'll find enough of these recharge stations spread out to avoid this frustration. As something designed as a roguelike, T for God also has a roguelike progression system. Every time you die, you get experience points based on how far you got and how many enemies you destroyed. You can also find upgrade stations throughout the game, and some of these upgrades become unlockable in the main menu using these experience points. Some are passive, like a damage boost, and some require clicking a button on your controller to activate it, like this amazing power I found that confuses all robots near you for a short period of time. I would have never gotten through my infinite dying loop in the second level of the game without it. There are also a lot of weapons to find in the game, sometimes just lying around or dropped from enemies. These weapons all have different parts and stats to them. Some are slow charging and heavy hitting, some rapid fire, and some even function as shotguns or burst firing pistols, though I mostly found powerful single shot weapons and really craved more variety in my choices. That too was probably a quirk of the generation. There are a couple weapon types too. Mostly you'll be using plasma weapons, which are classic laser bolt shooters, though there are also discharge weapons that function more like a futuristic taser, and corrosive weapons that shoot green at enemies and then cover them with a fart cloud when you hit them. Different enemy types will respond differently depending on what weapon that you use. Some are armored and will shrug off weaker attacks, some have shields you need to shoot around or punch through, and some try to avoid being destroyed by you by being small and fast. The enemy variety in T for God keeps you guessing, and that's a good thing. You also fight these enemies in a variety of different environments, though a lot of them just end up being maze-like procedurally generated hallways. A lot of the fighting that you do takes place in the maze-like series of corridors and rooms that you find yourself wandering through, but this changed up pretty often with large areas and big combat arenas that you get into some longer range laser battles. Considering that you won't be using your joystick to slide from cover to cover, the combat feels really amazing in this game. Gunfights feel a lot like Superhot VR when you're physically peeking out from pieces of cover to get a shot off and then dashing to a new area to reposition. Not having to use clunky movement methods during a fight means that the fighting feels a lot more natural. You're actually taking cover by moving to cover instead of joystick sliding towards it and ducking down. I damn near pulled a hamstring once or twice. The overall feel of the combat is intense and personal, though that tends to be the case mostly in large rooms and big epic fights. Most of the combat is done within the generated hallways and corridors. You'll definitely have noticed this far into the video that they're very cramped, even with the pretty big play space that I was using to record this footage. So most fights end up being at point blank range. This isn't as interesting as it could be, and I was really hungering for more variety in the combat. I felt like fighting in the impossible space mazes was either a breeze or overwhelming. Only in the epic boss battle sort of sections that were likely handcrafted and balanced combat experiences did the combat feel even between myself and the attacking robots. Luckily, to even the odds, you've got some devices you can find to help you out too, like a shield that can absorb quite a bit of punishment before disappearing, or explosive traps that can be planted into a wall. Some of the little robots that you find around function like this as well. Hostile robots are red, while neutral ones are white or black, and some of the neutral robots are really helpful. The little can-shaped ones regenerate some energy, and you can press a switch on the spider bots to make them run towards the nearest enemy and explode. These, combined with the unlockable abilities, give you more options than just shooting and makes combat feel much more interesting if you think for a moment about how to approach each situation, at least when you have the chance to. T for God doesn't explain any of this to you though, at least in the advanced difficulty mode. You'll have to figure out how these devices work when you first come across them, and that's an interesting thought in this game. Discovering the interactions you can do with these little robots to help you out is interesting and gave me a few aha moments that made me feel like a very smart cookie for figuring them out. Though either I just missed a lot of them, or there aren't as many as the developer likely wanted there to be. When you figure out how a machine works, and they're generally not very complicated, you figured all of them out forever. Speaking of ideas with good intentions that didn't quite pan out in this game, there's also a sort of crafting system where you can exchange the parts of your weapons in special rooms. In fact, the weapon system is really quite complicated with a lot going on under the hood. Each weapon has an impressive set of stats to compare and match and exchange. Personally, I never really got into this system. I exchanged some parts once or twice, but never really had that aha moment where I really felt like I could improve something. Again, procedural generation. You have to work with what is generated for you to get. Also, each weapon description reads like a book with a bunch of symbols and shorthand, and well, figuring that out might be part of this game, but I felt better off understanding my weapons by blasting a bot or two with them instead of piecing together my own instruction manual for reading the descriptions. So the combat, and generally the whole game, is either an extremely fantastic, one-of-a-kind, mind-bending, unique VR experience, or just kind of okay. I really wish the excellent impossible space technology of T for God was combined with more interesting gameplay. And while procedural generation is necessary to make infinitely physically walking in a VR world possible, it feels like it really needs some fine-tuning to give it a more balanced feeling experience. That being said, I did enjoy it all the way throughout, except for that infinite death loop I mentioned earlier. That was pretty unenjoyable. Oh damn, I totally forgot to talk about how the game looks and sounds. Let's see. Yeah, it looks pretty basic. Lots of blocks, not much texturing to speak of, but come on, it's a futuristic sci-fi dystopia. Everything is usually pretty drab, and that's a good thing here because the whole setting and world is drab feeling. You're on a suicide mission and there's a war going on and there's nothing natural and non-robotic in sight. I really got the feel of this future where everything is huge and impressive and so advanced technologically, but also very bleak. You don't see a single plant in the whole game, but lots of guns, warships, and assembly lines. The world of T for God is awesome to visit, but I certainly wouldn't want to live there. There are still some incredible vistas and views though, and after physically walking and running through the cramped interior mazes, being suddenly presented with a grand view of an impossible technological sci-fi landscape is not only refreshing, but absolutely amazing. A few times I found myself floored and enjoyed just looking at some of the ambitious and excellent scenery that really sells you the scale of the world that you're in. The sound is the same way. Simple and mostly confined to a few generic sounding music tracks and the whirring and clanking of robots or the machines that you're surrounded by. There are a few moments, like when a warship passes overhead, where the boom of the insane science keeping it afloat really stopped and drew me in as it passed by. These moments are pretty few and far between though, and generally the sound is serviceable, though T for God should really get some better weapon sound effects. They're the worst of all, have no punch, and sound cartoonish.
PXM system detected.
Though I do have to say, the robots did scare the hell out of me a few times in a very good way.
PXM system detected.
Overall, the game could use some touch-ups here and there, but generally T for God looks and sounds minimalist, which I think works for the game's setting and makes complete sense considering there is a single developer and musician working on this. The last thing I'll talk about is the story. As I've mentioned, the narrator sounds fantastic, but despite the strong premise, the story just kind of hangs. Your guy says some stuff, most of it doesn't make sense and has no context.
We considered Sadab civilization to be insect-like. Queens, drones, hives and stuff. But are we any different? Alia knows everything. She sees through our eyes.
There may be a race of bug aliens attacking. Also, tentacles are taking over some stuff. Yeah, the story is vague, full of proper nouns and names with no explanation, and really up to interpretation. The developer really went for the Dark Souls school of narrative design, but without awesome item descriptions to fill in the gaps and contemplate. The story makes no sense. And really, unless you like being generally confused about the wider world, we can leave the plot of T for God at you're trying to get to the Emperor to blow her up. Also, shouldn't it be Empress? The Emperor is always called her, but then they say Emperor instead of Empress. Anyway, do yourself a favor and try the T for God demo for the real-life walking movement and impossible space procedural generation. It's absolutely mind-melting and unique in a great way. Despite all of the negative things I've said about this VR game in this review, I don't regret buying the full game and playing it through, and I don't regret creating this long review. It's an okay game with an insanely awesome way to move around with your real legs. T for God is available on the Quest Store and Steam, and the demo is free. Seriously, try the demo, especially if you have a Quest. I highly recommend you try T for God for free. Oh, okay. I'll stop now. This has been Reality Remake. Enjoy yourself out there in VR and get your steps in today.